What's up, guys? My name is Luke, and I'm a sophomore political science major here at the University of New Mexico, and you're listening to The World Studio. In episode number 1, Cash Cow, we're going to be discussing the history of cattle ranching in South America and how the modern day globalization of beef as a commodity has served as a fuse for unsustainable cattle ranching that poses a major threat to specific regions in South America and the overall global climate. This specific issue and commodity interests me mostly because the growing rift between South America and the U.S., kind of in the sphere of politics and maybe geopolitics, maybe not in the sense of economics and commodities and beef production, but there is a growing rift in foreign policy, and I think rift in beef production and kind of the butting heads in some instances that we'll get into later may be a cause of that. Now, the cattle commodity in South America, like many commodities we discussed in class this year, has deep roots in colonialism. In the 16th century, not only the cattle, but all the methods, customs, and organizations that originated from the Iberian ranching system came to the New World, which was the Indies and, of course, South America, and to this day is the foundation of the Latin America ranching industry. Now, through the centuries, agricultural expansion has exponentially increased, and this can be attributed to the massive population growth after the Industrial Revolution, the increased amount of consumers, which can be attributed to the U.S. The U.S. is the number one consumer and at this point producer of beef in the world. And this poses challenges for South America. To narrow it down a little bit, in South America, Brazil is the number one exporter of beef and has the largest cattle ranching operations by far on the continent. This causes Brazil to face a unique set of challenges. The rapid deforestation of the Amazon, the laxing of environmental regulations and health protocols, the inability for the soil and land that these cattle are grazing on to recover from the high volume of heads of cattle, all just leads to this snowball effect that's really not being addressed. And up to this point, 2/3 of all deforestation in the central South American region is caused by cattle farming, and the central South American region is mostly made up of the Amazon rainforest. One of the premier contributing factors to this commodity's growth and rise to the importance it has nowadays is 1, the population growth of the earth, and 2, the globalization of this commodity, cattle, has created extreme demand globally, and so specifically in South America. Before, these ranchers would primarily only have to worry about supplying the product of beef to their surrounding region, but now this massive consumer network has opened up in this new age, and areas like the United States and Europe have developed a heavy reliance on South American beef, which causes these ranchers, these local ranchers, to produce on an industrial scale. For example, from 1999 to 2012, South America increased its share of global beef export market from 18 to 25%. This was primarily an increase from Brazil and Uruguay. There also exists many inefficiencies in the South American beef production industry that, if corrected, could provide justification or even stop the indiscriminate deforestation of their region. Some of these inefficiencies include ranchers slaughtering 20% of their cattle inventory. That's about half of what the U.S. slaughters. They export a higher percentage of their production instead of internalizing their own production and capitalizing on that revenue. There are 3 times as many cattle per person in South America than in the U.S., and most cattle are slaughtered close to or at more than 30 months old in South America, while the average U.S. steer is slaughtered at approximately 17 months old. A history that this commodity allows us to revisit and illustrate the best, I believe, is the history of exploitation by colonial powers without the building of an appropriate or sufficient industrial network or export network that allows that country to succeed when they decolonialize. And now the lack of sustainable practices and infrastructure is really taking a toll on the South American cattle industry because of the massive demand globally. They need to ramp up production, and they don't have the capability to do so in a way that's not shooting themselves in their foot. When thinking about this commodity in the context of what we learned in class, one thing that comes to mind that we read in The Social Life of Things is, quote, commodities can provisionally be defined as objects of economic value. And I think it's an interesting bracket that cattle and beef fall in, because the economic value is created through the necessity for this commodity. This product is one of the main feeders of the world in terms of food consumption. Another implicable text that we reviewed this semester that I found was A German Alabama in Africa. Specifically when they talk about the vent for surplus theory, in which Africans possess reserves of land and labor that remain untapped until European colonialism supplied a vent through which their surplus products could be exported to international markets. And I think this is applicable to the South American cattle industry, because until there was sort of a ladder to these international markets and these international consumers, there was no need for this massive scale and ramp up of products, and that opening up of the world in that so-called event has led to this massive ecological damage. Wrapping up episode 1, Cash Cow of the World Studio podcast, we take a look back at the ecological ramifications of the South American cattle industry and how colonialism was a big catalyst of this issue we're facing now, where the colonial cattle was brought over from the Iberian Peninsula, was bred and mixed into a new type of Creole cattle, and now the massive influx and ramping up of consumers from now the growing population in China to the US to Europe has caused this massive disparity in the capabilities of the South American beef production industry and what actually needs to be exported. And we're seeing that disparity play out in the deforestation of the Amazon, the poor soil practices, and the unsustainable ranching practices that are widely used in Brazil and Uruguay. The future of the South American cattle industry is definitely uncertain, and solutions are few. One of these could include knowledge transfer from American ranchers on sustainable practices and industrialization methods. But until then, the beef production industry in South America will continue to run unchecked and is only growing in size by the day.